Hello, it's the PC Gamer Show for Wednesday, April 6th, 2016. I forgot what month it was. I'm Evan Lottie, editor-in-chief of PC Gamer, joined by my friends beside me here, James Davenport.
Hello.
And Wes Fenlon.
Hey.
How's it going, guys?
Good.
Pretty good.
Mostly good.
Glad to be with you this week to talk about Doom, Dark Souls 3, Enter the Gungeon, VR. It's been an exciting period for that VR stuff. Wes, you're orbital bones deep.
Yeah, I basically can't talk about any of the other things because I've had things on my face almost every day the past 2 weeks. So
that's fine, but
and some VR.
Mixture of big games and experimental stuff this week. Very exciting. So let's start with stuff that we've been playing. Wes, you can maybe talk about VR experiences that are standing out. I mean, you're focusing the Vive right now, which is Valve's VR platform. You reviewed the Oculus the previous week.
Last week, yeah.
So what's standing out to you right now? I know some folks are kind of talking about how, like, obviously a lot of these experiences in VR right now aren't fully developed. You know, a lot of them are kind of samples.
There's a lot of demos
and stuff like that. But what's exciting you?
Pretty much everything I've played has been either a demo or part of an episodic game or a mini game collection or something like that. But there's little things to pick out of all of them. Like yesterday, or a couple days ago, I just booted up this VR baseball demo on Steam, and I was not particularly good at it. I could hit the ball fine, but couldn't really do the home run derby thing. I got like 4 out of the park at one point, and then I handed it to you, and you just crushed like 16 in a row.
Yeah.
And I guess that goes to show that it's accurate to real life sports ability or something. I don't know.
My family, I just picked it up from my dad. He's big into virtual baseball.
Someday this will be true.
Crushed him.
So I thought that was an interesting analog, that like your ability to, I guess, swing at the proper angle or whatever. It wasn't just about velocity because you were hitting them just right and knocking them out of the park. But there were a lot of really fun games on the Vive that use VR in very different ways. And I think, like with the Oculus, a lot of them are awesome for 10 or 15 minutes. Maybe aren't going to be something you actually want to play long term. There was a puzzle game called Carpe Lucem, I believe. I might be mispronouncing that I thought was really cool. It starts out with some really basic moving lasers or fields of energy from sort of a spout point to some kind of like mechanical flower that you have to blossom open by directing the right colored light to it. And so at first you're using these little pipes to direct the colors of light, but it gets 3D very quickly. So you're moving in and out of the depth of the environment, and as you move the little pipes around, they kind of change the angle that they allow you to route light based on the plane they're on. So that took what was the kind of puzzle game that you would play in, I mean, even like BioShock's hacking game. It's kind of a similar like routing, water or whatever through this maze or electricity. It started like that, but then it became a 3-dimensional puzzle. And that was a really cool thing to just walk around in VR and look at it from different dimensions and have that depth to the puzzles. I thought that like immediately grabbed me, and I wanted to play more of that. I think the most compelling use of VR so far has been the Gallery Call of Starseed, which is kind of a I guess Myst-inspired adventure game where you're walking around this kind of island at night, checking out these little environments where you'll find some like puzzles interaction to do. There's a character that you talk to, and it has shown me that the stuff that at least is the most compelling to me in VR is just feeling like you're inhabiting a space and being able to explore that space at your leisure, and it feeling quote unquote real. Like it doesn't feel like it's real life, but it feels like a real place. And I felt the same way in Chronos on the Oculus. Even though that's a third-person game, it still feels like you're in this place and you get the chance to explore it, uncover new things. So Call of Starseed is probably my favorite thing. I didn't want to take the headset off playing that one. I just wanted to get further into that world and kind of be more immersed in it.
Good sign.
That's a lot. There's like 20 other games.
Yeah, there's a lot.
So.
Yeah, we'll catch up more on VR later. But James, what about yourself?
Well, for the last 2 weeks, maybe 3, I've been playing this little game called Dark Souls 3. And that's taken up the bulk of my playtime.
Yeah.
Other than that, though, I've been dinking around a little bit in some of the VR demos when Wes isn't on them, and I briefly played about an hour of Hyper Light Drifter, which gets a lot of comparisons to Dark Souls for its difficulty and sort of layout and its cryptic narrative. And
Do you think those are fair comparisons? Accurate?
I think like tonally sure and structurally sure, but I mean it's really, I think people are very quick to compare things to Dark Souls, and it's a bit reductive.
Is the game hard? It's Dark Souls.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't like to lean on that too much. I think it's a bit apt here. Great music and very pretty, and I still gotta play more of it. Tom beat it apparently, and he
in like one sitting.
yeah, and he's like, I don't get why everyone's complaining about the bosses. They were easy. Just like slicks his hair back, whatever. Pro gamer. I played a lot of Enter the Gungeon these past 2 days or so. It's been out. Yesterday, Tom and I on our lunch break dipped into that, and it's a top-down dual stick bullet hell shooter with roguelike elements. You die and you start over.
It's a lot like Spelunky in terms of structure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, like, while you may die in a single run, you may earn something that gives you kind of greater progression. Or like, there, in Spelunky, if you play that game, our 2013 game of the year, 14.
Is it 13?
Everything-
13 or 12? I think it was 13.
Everything blurs together at this point after 8 years at PC Gamer. But yeah, like in Spelunky, you encounter like the cave digger or whatever, who you can give some resources to, and he allows you like shortcuts to future levels if you want to jump ahead. And in Gungeon, you encounter this guy who's like working on the elevator system, who you can work with him to sort of enhance that. And there's sort of a marketplace off to the side. So clearly inspired by Spelunky and random generated levels and stuff like that. So
yeah, and a bunch. Another point of inspiration, I think, is Binding of Isaac, because there's a ton of weapons that do behave in all sorts of different ways, and there's also a bunch of passive items that I think one of them is like all corpses explode, and another is anytime you get hit, ice spikes fire out of you. Just all sorts of random stuff. Some are a little less out there, but it's cool. There's active abilities, which you can revive a co-op partner if you're playing co-op. You can call down an ammo drop. You can do all sorts of neat stuff, and it's like a lot of fun anytime you find one or open a chest and unlock a new one. It may not help you necessarily, but it taps into like a sense of curiosity about where these abilities and guns and their creativity, where it might end and how far they go. And so far, there's just been a lot to see and play around with.
Yeah, I mean, in Spelunky, the items almost have come from this like Japanese style of design, where the items have specific kind of moves or functionality that they provide, like they help you climb a certain wall, or they help you double jump or something like that. But in Gungeon, it's very much a combat-driven game, and it's more like a loot experience of you open a chest and like, what did I get? It's like very random. You can get everything from a t-shirt cannon to I got a beehive a couple times yesterday. You just hold the trigger down and bees come out and automatically guide and
That's amazing.
do damage over time. Down to conventional pistols and shotguns and stuff like that. So like especially at the outset of, I'm playing it too, you might have guessed. It's a fun experience of discovery right now of like just what guns are in the game. I don't know. I'm kind of figuring that out every time, and every time I open a chest, it's a chance, or defeat a boss, it's a chance to kind of see what weird creativity is in there. You're in a rhythm, and it's like how much life and resources can you bring into that like mid-tier or late tier of the game. But really enjoying it. It's super polished.
Oh, and I love the art direction. It's just so funny. Well, and just the flavor text in
Kill the same like basic enemies. I have to. The bosses are randomized too, which I think is a great decision.
Yes.
So like at the end of a stage, I haven't gotten very far. I've only been able to defeat like 2 successive bosses in a run. But it rolls. I think there are 3 or 4 bosses I encountered in the first at the end of the first map. So it like rolls one of those in for you, and you fight them, and you're like, okay, you go on the next one, and it does the same thing. And there's a boss at the end. So it's sort of like going through the motions, and I guess that's also true of something like Spelunky, where you're in a rhythm, and it's like how much life and resources can you bring into that like mid-tier or late tier of the game. But yeah, really enjoying it. It's super polished.
Oh, and I love the art direction. It's just so funny. Well, and just the flavor text in the item descriptions. It's all stupid puns about guns and ammo, and it's just charming as hell. A lot of the enemies are just like literally bits of ammo with faces and arms and legs that, well, the shotgun shell will shoot shotgun-style shells at you. And
can you put their corpses in your gun after you kill them?
I wouldn't be surprised if that's like some kind of power-up or passive ability. But yeah, I'm at the point where I just have to keep playing and get better and see how far I can get. So it's really cool.
On the subject of roguelikes, I've been playing like the grandfather of all these games,
Yeah,
Nethack. And doing a kind of like a lo-fi video series the past few weeks, learning to play Nethack, which if you don't know is there was Rogue, and then there was Hack, and then Hack evolved into Nethack for the past like 25 years. They've still been, people occasionally put out updates for that game, and it is really amazing and just bonkers filled with stuff. Like every nerd reference you can think of that would come out of 80s, 90s, like D&D lore, fantasy, all that kind of stuff is in there in some way. Like you can get a towel in the game. It's a Hitchhiker's Guide reference. You can wrap the towel around your head and have like telekinesis and see, or telepathy. You can see like enemies through walls and stuff like that. There's all kinds of D&D creatures in the game. So many little like just joke bits of text they throw in there. But then mechanically, it's insanely deep as well. Because every run, if you're familiar with in Binding of Isaac and you get like pills and you don't know what the pills do in the cards, it's all randomized. This has that, but for like every type of scroll, magic wand, they'll just be totally random potions, colors, and that kind of stuff. And there's little ways you can find out what they are if you become more experienced. Like a scroll of identify is one of the most important items in the game because nothing is identified until you use a scroll on it or some other trick to find out what it is. They're usually really cheap. So if you go to a shop and you try to sell them or you see really cheap scrolls, you can figure out, oh, that's probably a scroll of identify. If you get really lucky and find a magic marker, you can write your own scrolls. If you go to a fountain, you can like mix potions into the fountain and then turn other potions into whatever you want by mixing the stuff together. That game's crazy deep and fun. And I had a tragic death from like a 12-hour run the other day that I'm still really upset about.
This is something that's really cool. I'm sort of starting to see a common theme between some of the games we're going to be talking about today because it's something James and I were talking about at lunch, this concept of, what is the right balance between mystery and obfuscating information in a game, especially single-player games.
Yeah.
And revealing that to the player so that it's transparent and they can understand it and they can know how to interact with it. I mean, a small but interesting example, just the altars in
Enter the Gungeon.
Enter the Gungeon.
Yeah.
So you stumble on these rooms and they have altars in them.
Guess what game that's from?
Nethack?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, great kind of inspirations. That's interesting.
I don't know what they do, but go on.
Well, that's the thing.
We don't either.
Neither do I. Like, I don't know what they do. You just sort of walk up to them and it says like a bit of text and you can do nothing. So presumably you're supposed to put something on that altar or interact with it in some other way.
Items, yeah.
But like this is an issue I'm facing a lot lately in games like Darkest Dungeon, Stardew Valley. I think Dark Souls also comes into this a little bit, but like, it's for everybody to decide for themselves. But I'm sort of at this juncture of, do I just look this up on the internet, or do I let myself discover it, or do I sort of, like also in Enter the Gungeon, there's this there's a shop where it's like a shop that's outside of the runs that you make, outside of the Gungeon itself. It's sort of what's the name of that? It's like in the character select area, basically. So you earn this currency that persists across your run. It's like the only thing that persists. So even when you lose, you keep this currency, but you can go to the shop before your run and buy different upgrades and stuff. And it's not really fully explained.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if these are consumable upgrades, like explosive ammo. Do I just get it for that run, or does it integrate it in the game in some other way? Is it permanent? Like, I'm not actually sure. And I could just look that information up, or I could just sort of interact with that system myself and discover it over time. You know what I mean? And Darkest Dungeons is like hugely, it just buries information, like really tries to confuse you outright sometimes. Like the way certain things work, it's very intentional. That like you learn by dying, and that's true in a lot of roguelikes.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm interested in getting you guys' thoughts on how you personally kind of interact with those systems, where something is like really opaque, like all the information isn't there. I mean, do you just jump on a wiki and try to figure out yourself, or does it depend, or what do you enjoy?
The design of the game, I think, matters a lot, and there's like a fine line to walk for a lot of developers when it comes to that. I don't design games, so I don't know what that actually entails. But in a game like Dark Souls, I typically go blind and just do it on my own because the systems are like built for experimentation. You get punished for dying repeatedly on long runs, but there's also a bonfire or something typically not too far away. So you can throw yourself at a problem or, experiment with items and so on, and you'll respawn and everything will be okay, and you'll come back with all sorts of knowledge. And most of the items in Dark Souls and the systems aren't so complex and deep and obfuscated that they're impossible to understand without, looking at wikis. So I think that's a fine balance for me. Darkest Dungeon sounds a little more, I don't know. Like, is that? Do you feel like they want you to go have conversations and look online for this kind of thing, or do you feel like your experience is being compromised by going out and trying to?
I think it has a little bit. Like, Darkest Dungeon is a game where I have enjoyed digging into wikis and learning strategies and just reading and consuming information about the game. That's the experience I've sort of given myself. I haven't sort of gone in blind into everything. I haven't looked at like endgame bosses and stuff. That's something I'm kind of still insulated. But like, the game has a lot of these what they call curios. So as you're moving through dungeons, there are different objects, like a stack of books or a fountain or a holy altar or a cursed altar or whatever, and you interact with them in some way. But there are unique interactions if you input certain of your inventory items, like consumables, bandages and stuff like that, into those items. You can like automatically get the best result, basically.
Okay.
So they basically operate as like keys. And the game is hard, and I've like looked up all those curio interactions. I've memorized some of them in order to get the best result because I want more loot. I mean, basically, if you get it wrong, your characters can get diseased, damaged, afflicted semi-permanently. So I think the game, I don't know, it's hard to say what the designers want you to do. I think the designers want you to do whatever you want, but arguably the best experience, again, it's up to the player, but is to fail and learn along the way. I think if we're thinking about that game in terms of its roguelike spirit, you want to like sort of touch the thing and be uncertain about it because it has a different chance to like provide certain results, basically, which I think is really cool.
But that takes a lot of time.
Yeah. It does. So I don't know.
I think Dark Souls is a good example where there's so much in that game that is a rich payoff to discover yourself in terms of exploration, learning kind of what weapons suit you well, that kind of thing. But there's a lot you can gain as an RPG player, a lot of satisfaction in looking up wiki stuff, and not like here's a walkthrough of this entire area, but okay, I really want to play a dexterity-based character. I don't want to spend this entire game trying to just find every good weapon for this character and then spend hours grinding for resources to upgrade them to see which ones scale the best with this ability. Yeah. I want to look online and go, okay, I really want to try this weapon. I need to go farm it from this place and do that. And you still get the experience of exploring these areas and obtaining those things. And if you're the kind of person who likes to min-max characters or try to build the perfect character build for you, I think that's the big takeaway.
Yeah.
But I really admire people who have the dedication to avoid looking up too much stuff, and I think Fez is a really good example. When that game came out, people built communities online on some forums and like on Steam where they said, okay, we want to replicate the experience of playing this game like it came out in 1995. And the only people you could talk to were your friends at school or something like that. And so obviously it was a larger group of people because it was on a forum, but they were intentionally avoiding all other avenues of learning information about the game. And so they would find an area and go like, oh, how does this bell work? Does anybody want to like toss around theories? And they kind of made a pact to ignore outside influences and just talk through the really mysterious parts of that game together. And I think it's a really, really cool way to play these kinds of games.
It's like bordering on role-playing almost.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of dedication because it's so easy to find that information or even accidentally bump into it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, Stardew Valley, I'm weirdly sensitive to spoilers about that game now, to the extent that we published a story on the patch notes. Stardew Valley got a patch this week, and I had to not read it because I knew it was going to say, "Hey, we fixed this thing that you haven't heard of yet, Evan. I've been playing for like 17 or 18
the
hours."
Alien Invasion.
Yeah, I mean, there
Act 3.
there are like, I don't want to spoil anything myself, but like that game is so sensitive to that kind of stuff because it's very much about discoveries. I mean, different things happen in different seasons and. Just a lot of like little secrets like that. I just think it's an interesting topic because it's sort of, I think just if you're playing games today, I mean, unless you're playing just competitive games, League of Legends and stuff like that, I think this is something everybody has to tackle with in some way on like a monthly basis, or maybe it changes based on the game for you. But how do you deal with secrets and knowledge in games? How do you sort of interface with that? I mean, are games about winning to you, or the experience of discovering these secrets on your own and sort of knowing, like, it's almost a completionist kind of argument of like, are games about knowing everything you can, knowing the full extent of what is in the code and sort of uncovering all that and then deciding how you want to interact with it? Or are you comfortable potentially missing like whole parts of the game? James, you talked about in your review, like there were whole areas or like little pieces of Dark Souls 3 that
entire areas
you felt like people would just walk by. I mean, like
the first game is infamous for that too. With what, Great Ash Lake. What's it? Do you remember the name of that area in Blighttown? There's a massive, awesome area that is behind like an invisible wall in a 3D game. I mean, we're not talking like Wolfenstein 3D.
Where it's like a room with the chests.
Yeah, no.
So it's like a level, or
can you explain better? Some contemporary examples, I'm sure.
Oh, in Dark Souls 3 or just
either one?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, specifically in Dark Souls 3, without giving anything away, the way the game kind of is constructed is in these modules where there's certain levels that you walk through, and they're these big, expansive labyrinths onto themselves, and they typically cap off with a boss, and there's all sorts of obstacles in the way. And they're so dense with not just like content, as in combat and things to do, but lore and stuff integral to the entire world. And some of them in Dark Souls 3 are also hidden by an invisible wall or by doing a certain thing in a specific place that you can only know to do by thinking it might work, just like putting the pieces together and saying, I wonder if this would give me anything. And it turns out behind these walls and these, I don't want to call them puzzles, but there are huge levels. Arguably the best in Dark Souls 3, there's one hidden level that's probably one of my favorite in the entire series and caps off with the best boss in the entire series. And it's just optional.
Wow.
Like unique enemies specific to these areas that you won't see anywhere else in the game, that an artist spent, probably weeks on, and they rigged it up and did it, and it appears twice, in a secret area behind a wall.
Well, that's interesting because that's almost
it's amazing.
That's interesting when you're handling it, because you figure. I mean, it's just your opinion, I guess, whether it's the best boss or whatever. But if, in fact, say most players agree this is some of the best content of the game, it's going to become so infamous that it'll almost defeat the purpose of hiding it.
Yeah,
probably. But still, there's going to be people who like don't frequent game websites.
Exactly.
Don't watch stuff on YouTube. That are going to fact just walk by it.
Yeah, there's a confidence in like how they've put it together that they know like Dark Souls people are going to talk about it to death and you're going to find out. But yeah, there's a bunch of Jane and John Does out there that will just I beat the game, hooray, I'm done. And there's another third if we're talking like content wise that you have yet to see.
Interesting.
My reaction to that kind of stuff too, taking it back to like the school analogy or something. If someone told me, "Oh, you went by this place. Did you know there was this whole incredible area that you missed?" I wouldn't be like, "Oh, I'm so pissed that they hid that." I would be like, "That's amazing that you had this extension of an experience that I did not even know was there, and your time with the game was fundamentally changed by this thing that just flew over my head." I would probably be a little like sheepish that I missed it, but I would be really happy that that was a thing that was hidden enough that it was special to find it.
I think exploration in general is one of the hardest things to make interesting in a modern game, especially in a single player game. I think it's, even me, it is hard to separate myself from just playing the game through the UI in a sandbox kind of environment. Ubisoft games, they're just a smattering of all these little objectives and mini objectives and quests and mini game type stuff that you need to get to and manage, and you're sort of cleaning a map that's been handed to you. Playing this like weird map Pac-Man or something. You got to eat all the little fruits, but I get back to Arma and Daisy and games like that they focus on creating this really authentic world, and I think Dark Souls it seems like it's true there in a different kind of way. It's maybe just a really cohesive, interesting, artistic environment that is inherently interesting, right? You want to move through it. It has a personality, it has a spirit, and you're discovering that and kind of developing a relationship with it as a character throughout the game, as opposed to, well, the level is basically a big obstacle, a big bit of geometry that I'm just sort of navigating in order to get to the stuff I want.
Yeah,
it's in the way. It's in between me and the gameplay, right? It takes a ton of work to craft a level that sort of supersedes that experience of just kind of being in the way, I guess.
Yeah, it's one of the first games in a while that I can recall just stopping to either look like some of the levels are deliberately designed with like just overhangs that let you look at where you've been and where you're going, or just a nice view, because they're just interesting to look at. You can look at a tree and say, why is that tree so fucked up? And why is there like a corpse laying next to it? And the item that's attached to the corpse maybe gives some insight into that character's death or something. And that's like some rudimentary Dark Souls storytelling. But or the enemies wandering the level. Like how are they? Like where are they in relation to things in the environment matters. And the way they're designed from an artistic standpoint, and the way they're designed from a behavioral standpoint in combat says things about them and their relation to the environment. And it's a game that forces you to tiptoe through it basically because it's so dangerous, but also rewards that slow, just kind of molasses pour through the entire game. And
cool.
Are those NPC deaths ever not just really depressing?
They're all
like no one dies and you're like, oh, that was kind of sweet. They died with their puppy or whatever. Like, no, it's just sad and alone.
It's every death in Dark Souls, every character begins, no matter what time you meet them in the game, is you they either had noble intent at some point or have noble intent now and become corrupted or betrayed by their noble intent in some way and then die tragic and alone. It's like every character.
Poor Big Hat Logan.
Yeah, poor Big Hat Logan.
Great. So yeah, we're definitely in the middle of our Dark Souls 3 talk now,
yes.
which is excellent. It's where we want to be headed during this podcast. So James, you reviewed it for us.
Yeah.
Gave it a really strong score.
Yeah.
The text is up on our site, obviously, right now, PCGamer.com. What are the big takeaways for Dark Souls fans and non-Dark Souls fans who have maybe hesitated in the series? Is this the game for them, and why?
Sounds like Evans.
Evans. That's just my personal inquiry. But no, like, what are the big changes from DS2 and the previous game?
Well, to me, it feels like for Dark Souls fans or Souls fans in general, whether you played Bloodborne, Demon Souls, this game feels sort of like a best of compilation of all those games, from kind of the hub of Demon Souls and some of the magic and sorcery mechanics, to the Dark Souls lore and the world. It's definitely much closer tied to the first game, and you're going to get some really interesting payoff and callbacks for fans of the original. Dark Souls 2 has a place in there as well. It has I don't want to say the combat of Bloodborne, but a quicker combat style, because there are so many more enemies on screen. This game is not beholden to the PS3 and 360 this time, so there's a lot more going on.
And they move faster in general, right?
Yeah, there's a lot more aggressive enemies, and to be able to like juggle, all of the enemies in a certain arena, you got to be able to react quicker. It does not make the game easier or less intentional. Every swing is still a commitment, and every block is, or every hit you take is still gonna hurt a lot.
Something that struck me just watching you play a little bit, I haven't really gotten to play yet, was not that this is different than their other games in their series, but one of the things that it reminded me what makes Dark Souls stand out as an action series compared to a lot of other games I played is just the variety of ways that any individual enemy will attack you.
Yeah.
Even just like some random guy with a sword will have multiple moves that they'll come at you with and surprise you, especially when you're trying to parry attacks or dodge attacks. And like thinking about that, how that compares to your typical shooter where enemies maybe hop from cover to cover. If the AI is pretty good, they like try to flank you, but it's still really obvious and predictable.
Yeah.
And obviously that's not a one-to-one comparison, but I think a lot of action games too, beat 'em ups and stuff, you have the NPCs have pretty standardized like couple punches moves that they come at you with, and like the enemies in Dark Souls, it seems like even just basic enemies will throw in some crazy thing you don't see coming after you've been fighting them for a few minutes.
I've spent 60 hours playing that game and revisited a lot of areas and revisited a lot of enemies, and there's still, especially in some of the tougher enemies that are like kind of on your level, like knights.
God, those guys are intimidating.
Oh yeah, here we're seeing the Dancer of the Boreal Valley. This is one of the earlier bosses they showed. But yeah, each enemy has just a lot of moves that eventually become second nature, and it makes combat, no matter how many times you face something, typically fairly intense and exciting.
Especially bosses, but
bosses.
Not just bosses. Yeah.
Most of the bosses in this game, and they definitely stand out, are just incredible. They're all, most of them, there's I think over 20, require some kind of different approach. They're designed differently, so you won't just be fighting. I know Dark Souls 2 is notorious for just fighting a bunch of knights, big knights. This has monsters. It's got big knights. It's got all sorts of twisted nightmare creatures, and they all require different strategies and different ways of thinking. And they all are each their own character with their own theme music and their own like beautiful arena. And I wish there was a VR mode for Dark Souls where I could just like look at these models. Because
that might come. Someone might hack that together.
Please.
I think that in particular deserves a lot of praise because Enter the Gungeon, again, I'm only like, maybe 2 steps into the game almost. I've only gotten it past 2 bosses successively and in a run. But I've sort of been let down by the design of those bosses so far. I'm hoping there are some more interesting, more complex ones later on in the game, but they all kind of amount to, they stand in the middle of this mostly obstacle-free arena, and they shoot out different patterns of projectiles. You know, sometimes they'll fill the screen with like a really dense pattern of projectiles. Sometimes it's a ring. Sometimes it's like sort of machine gun, just tracking you around the map, and you're circle strafing, you're dodge rolling. It's hard, but I wouldn't say it's interesting. I guess the most interesting one was sort of this snake boss that you have to target different parts like little segments of it to shoot off the turrets that it spawns. And yeah, I think boss design is something so ingrained in us. I mean, if you're 20 or 30 years old, you've been playing the same type of boss encounters, I think, for your lifetime. It's a dude at the end of the level that, has some unique twist to him. And I think one of the biggest challenges is just, how do you make that twist interesting without, once a player figures it out, now it's trivial, right? Right.
And here, I won't say the bosses aren't trivialized once you. There's no just repeat this pattern and they're dead trivialization, but they definitely do have all sorts of behaviors and attacks that can be memorized, and that's sort of the joy, is unpacking what they're going to do, maybe baiting certain attacks, predicting certain things. But this is like after 15 deaths or something like that, and
I'm guessing most of them change up the attacks when they hit like 30% health.
There's
somewhere around there.
I don't recall that being a huge thing in the other games, but in this one, almost every boss has a second stage of some kind where they become enraged or something like that and switch up completely. So it's not only your sustaining, your ability to combat its first, set of attacks and read it as they're coming at you quickly. It switches up halfway through, and your mode of thinking is going to be tested in a different way completely.
I think that's always a good trope. I mean, usually it's a pacing mechanism within a boss often. I mean, most bosses, like, they're repeating, like you're saying, like a certain set of behaviors if they're sort of following that traditional mold. And, it's sort of how well can I keep up with them and sort of see, technically respond to those those patterns, those behaviors. And when they go into that, this isn't even my final form kind of moment, it's you sort of get a breath, but also like, oh shit, I need to change my game plan and respond differently, and I can't just keep doing the same thing I've been doing for the past 5 minutes.
Exactly, and
that's a Krillin move. Don't be Krillin.
But to reel it back a bit, for people who have maybe never played a Dark Souls game and have seen, I think this one's getting marketed pretty heavily compared to the other two. I think this is a perfectly good time to get in on the craze, because this is at its core, shed all the baggage of the other games and everything you've heard about the difficulty and these things that maybe have turned you off from Dark Souls games in the past. These games are not, to me, strictly about being hard, and I think what they are about to me is just being a fantasy world, and being difficult is a part of that, like inherent to the themes going on in Dark Souls. It's a game that is about a decaying world. It's about tragedy and these characters in this world. It's about being a convincing place and really eliciting emotions of desperation that I don't think a lot of other games do as well as Dark Souls does.
Do you think playing Dark Souls 3 first will, to some extent, kind of ruin you for the previous ones, going back to a game that is much slower paced or is maybe rougher around the edges?
I can say that I think Dark Souls 1 is going to be a game that stands the test of time. Like, it's one of the rare 3D games that it almost becomes, its aesthetic is almost better for how the more dated it becomes, because it's kind of this just bleak, stripped away, minimalist, quiet world. And the mechanics, like just swinging swords and all that stuff, are fundamentally like as good as Dark Souls 3. Dark Souls 3 is just a little quicker, I think. So I think you can play Dark Souls 1 after this, and you will still make a lot of the connections to it that Dark Souls 3, I won't say it wraps up, but it definitely layers on them and adds to them.
The first Dark Souls is a weird and rare example where I think the game is actually better for being worse in some ways. Like,
Yeah.
it has rough edges that can be annoying situations where enemies are kind of attacking you. You know, like the fire bombers in early Undeadburg, like that first area you kind of go through where they're throwing shit at you on the bridge, and you go in a room, and if you kind of mess up, you'll get like 5 undead swarming you at once. And as a new player, super frustrating because they'll just kill you over and over again. And they're kind of little moments in that game where it feels like a little janky here, something's just not polished with money. Basically, it feels like a game that they didn't spend $50 million on. They spent, $10 million on or something like that. But that ends up giving it a certain just degree of personality and uniqueness that I think it would not have if it were a more refined game. And I don't know if that really extends to Dark Souls 2 or 3, but that's something I think about a lot with that game. When I finally got over the hump of appreciating the things that at first pissed me off, it made it, I felt like those things made it more special, even though they weren't necessarily good design in some parts.
Maybe you can talk about this too, Wes, but I say this without having played Dark Souls 3. I played the first one a little bit, and I got frustrated by it.
We played it together a little bit.
Walked away, yeah. But it occurs to me, this sort of reminds me of Resident Evil 4 in the sense that it is a game, with a lot of Japanese design, a lot of Eastern sensibilities, but with a Western kind of control scheme or a Western, sort of spirit. Sort of shaking hands with that, and that's what makes the game work so well. I mean, that's what I remember. That's sort of my single unifying idea about Resident Evil 4 is they took a series that had been sort of muddled in that tank control scheme that a lot of people loved, but never kind of broke out into a great feeling experience. And only when they put that over the shoulder perspective and like the laser sight in the gun and dodge rolling and stuff like that in the Resident Evil 4 did it like really congeal into one of the best games of all time, in my opinion. But does Dark Souls 3 feel that way, where it's sort of like it's kind of the best of East and Western ideas in game design? Or
I think I can't speak to Japanese game design too much, but there is sort of like
I don't know how Western I feel like they are. I'm trying to identify what elements I would think are inspired by Western games, and I don't know if I can think of any.
It's hard. Yeah, it's really hard to like break them up like that. But I think Dark Souls 3 is definitely. I hesitate to use the word accessible in case that would in fear of pissing off everyone who plays these games. But it's more accessible maybe to a Western audience for its quicker combat, and that's literally like a feedback thing, just for like I press a button and it does something quicker, and then I can like react quicker. You're not canceling attacks, but there's sort of a much more immediate flow and immediate feedback, as opposed to the other ones, which were you'd press a button, watch an attack happen. Some of that is still here with the heavier weapons, but it's definitely it feels streamlined, to be vague, but overall, not to dwell on it too long, I think everyone should play this game, even if like
everyone.
Hear my call, please, all of you haters. It's really something special. If you're scared of the difficulty, try it anyway, because it's a game designed to kill you, and it's death is not the fulcrum for the difficulty. The fulcrum for difficulty in these games is just like how much you're willing to pay attention to the world, and how much you're willing to connect the dots. There's so much more going on than just I beat the boss, hooray, I'm the best gamer. It's a very, very rich world with lore that I'm not a fantasy guy. I'm really not, but I read wikis and about Dark Souls 1 to this day. Don't get me started on Bloodborne. Like it gets its hooks in you, and I think part of that is up because of the philosophy of how these the narrative is designed. Is Miyazaki used to read books, fantasy books as a kid, and he couldn't read half or understand half of what he read. So he would just
Because they were in English, or just because he was a kid?
I think I can't remember exactly the details. But I think he was young and just didn't understand, couldn't comprehend half of it, and would fill in the blanks on his own. And it made those blank spaces sort of horrifying and ripe for imagination. And I think a lot of that is like perfectly represented. It's represented in the other games pretty well, but I think here, because the game looks so much better, because the combat trappings are like are quicker and more frenetic, and like there's it's less of a burden, I think, for maybe people who wouldn't want to play a game like this. It comes together in a way that the other games, I think Dark Souls 1 definitely does, Dark Souls 2 less so, but like in the most ideal way a game like this or a Souls game has so far. It's just like the most cohesive, shining example of dark fantasy action RPG storytelling and play I've maybe ever experienced. So,
so pretty good.
yeah, it's pretty fucking good.
Pretty good.
All right, that anecdote about him as a kid reminds me of the Japanese movie House, or Hausu, that Evan and I have seen. That was directed by, I think, Japanese director who decided like the adult mind is cannot fantasize enough to write true horror. It's too grounded to reality. So he got his like 8-year-old daughter or 12-year-old daughter. She's like, write me like a messed up story. And then she just wrote the plot of this just totally batshit movie where a man turns into a pile of bananas and people's heads become detached from their bodies and kind of just float around.
It's legitimately disturbing, though.
Yeah, it is.
The piano that eats the guy at some point, right? Is that right?
So it has so many just non sequitur moments.
I need to watch this.
Just totally, just totally disconnected events happening that it will cut between in ways that your brain just cannot make the leap. And it works. It's
sort of like a movie that you watch when you're high or something, right?
Could be.
Sort of.
That's why,
I'm not advocating.
I played all 60 hours of Dark Souls, just blazed.
Dank Souls.
Dank Souls.
Right on. Well, let's move on to talking about Doom. I've been playing that thing.
Oh yeah. How's that?
Not anymore because the beta is closed for now. But there's
going
to be an open beta in Doom. Doom itself is out, I think, like May 14th or something.
Yeah.
Next month.
That's really soon.
But as I look up the beta date here, did you guys get a chance to play the Doom multiplayer beta at all? Closed beta?
I did not.
All right,
but I saw a good gif of Chris ripping Tyler's arm off and beating him to death with it, and then getting shot by Super Douche or something, 2000. I can't remember.
That did happen. So it was pretty slim. I mean, there was only 2 maps in there.
Yep.
I think all the weapons seem to be in there. I guess remains to be seen, but it's kind of a weird thing. Doom multiplayer is, I would say, unapologetically retro. You know, it's very much in the style of those shooters that came out in 1999 and before. So Unreal Tournament and Quake 3 and all that stuff. All the classic kind of weapons pulling from that roster. You got your rocket launcher, you got your lightning gun, which is actually a Quake weapon, but whatever. You got your sort of railgun Gauss cannon thing that's like a pickup in the environment. You got your, what else is there? Kind of like assault rifle, heavy assault rifle, like M249, Space Marine equivalent type thing. So it feels familiar in that way, but there's all these kind of like somewhat arbitrary modern influences and twists that I don't think necessarily enhance the experience. Remains to be seen. So
like meta armor upgrades and that kind of stuff, like character customization stuff.
Yeah, so there's a progression system, which in and of itself is not an offensive thing, but it just sort of feels, well, it's 2016. God, I feel like we better have one of those. I feel like people have to earn XP or else, like, because in my mind, Quake 3 especially, and this game is not Quake 3. Okay, like there's double jumping in this game. You cannot rocket jump in this game. It is not Quake 3. Right? But Quake 3 and the games, maybe not so much Unreal Tournament, but certainly Quake is all about the intrinsic fun and skill of getting a kill. in that moment. It's not about, giving you points and you did it and patting you on the back and all that stuff. Like, it is a game about purity as much as anything else, and the purity of movement, and just putting no barriers between the player and like an infinite skill ceiling, right? So it feels a little strange, yes, to be earning. Well, what you earn is actually even weirder. There are these sort of death bonuses. I can't think of another game that's used them, but I'm sure there's another shooter. Call of Duty might have at one point. I can't remember. But basically, when you die, there's like one of several equipable kind of bonuses you can get. Like, you spawn with a little bit more armor, or you spawn with a temporary wall hack that allows you to see some enemies, or you spawn with you can see the cooldown counters on power-ups and pickups and stuff. So I can see like, oh, quad damage is like 45 seconds away. Maybe I should like come back here later. So it's like sort of giving you these benefits for dying, right? That you can customize and select yourself, and you unlock those through the progression system by just playing in more matches and getting kills and stuff. So that's a little weird.
Yeah.
I can understand why they're going with that, why maybe they'd be insecure about a game that is just purely has like no meta kind of experience, nothing that you're earning and customizing. I think they want people to keep playing, obviously, and stick around.
Do those death perks feel fun? Like, is it a cool system?
It remains to be seen. I mean, again, with there only being 2 maps and there were 2 modes, it's sort of, I just didn't want them. I made use of them, I guess. It's like, okay, now that I can see that this power-up is spawning in a few seconds, I'm definitely going to just sit here and wait for it to come up. But I don't know. That's not the kind of game I want to play. If this game is going to be a classic shooter, and yes, it's releasing on console, and I understand they have to bridge that gap a little bit, I don't want that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it remains to be seen. Like, can I turn this stuff off and play on custom servers and whatnot? It's not really clear. But the gun design, which is what I want to spend the most time talking about, is a little bit underwhelming. I'm going to not be too hyperbolic, but it's a little bit sad to see these weapons recast in a way that is not totally exciting, because they are the templates for so many modern guns. I mean, Team Fortress 2 has a Quake rocket launcher skin. It is an homage to that time. You know what I mean? And if you're a classic FPS player, you grew up with these guns and they mean something to you, and they are the molds with which other guns are created. From the Wolfenstein, the New Order, and all those other like modern shooters. I think they're all influenced by Quake, Doom, Unreal, and there's a super shotgun, and it's actually the only reloadable gun in the game right now, that at least that I've seen, and it's just, I don't know, it's so ordinary. And I think this is the case of like a lot of the other guns, where the rocket launcher, its unique twist is you can detonate the rockets in midair now, and you're sort of like, oh, that feels sort of arbitrary. Like, would anybody like asking for the ability to detonate rockets in midair? You're like, okay, well,
Tribes players.
Yeah, sure. Like, what interesting. Okay, it does create a few like interesting moments where, say, like I'm dancing with somebody who's behind a pillar, and it's sort of that game of like, am I going left? Is he going right? Trying to get on the right side of him while dodging. But I can sort of throw a rocket behind a wall, detonate it, and hope to do some splash damage. Like,
right.
And Doom, by the way, has damage numbers now.
Whoa.
Which is a little bit jarring. And again, not anything I asked for. Like any like pure classic FPS player, like, who cares about damage numbers? That seems sort of I don't know.
They're dead or they're not dead.
Yeah, I mean, but in practice, I sort of found myself coming around to that a little bit more. It was like, okay, yes, it is helpful to know, did I do like a max damage hit? I can sort of receive that information and know, like, what do I need to do with the follow-up? Do I need to hit this guy dead on, or can I just sort of like throw a reckless quick shot at him and probably get a kill? But the aesthetics of these guns are just so underwhelming. It's really disappointing. Like, the rocket launcher, there's kind of no fun aspects to it. Nothing feels over the top. I think that's kind of my biggest complaint right now, where it feels, not to diss Halo, because I think Halo does have some pretty good like weapon models and stuff like that in the first person. They have some good animations, and Bungie's always been really good at presentation. But they just sort of remind me of generic Space Marine guns. And I know that's almost literally who you are in Doom, but
yeah, but it's hell is taken over, right? Shouldn't there be some creative liberties? They can just, I mean, there's all of that the hellish aesthetic and like fantasy fiction that comes with it. You could mine and make some crazy shit.
Like, what if you're a Space Marine who'd survived in hell for 15 years and were like crazy Lawrence Fishburne from that Predators movie, living on the alien planet and like cobbling together human weaponry with crazy hell shit.
Ram your arm down like a demon's throat and like you like squeeze his glands and he like farts fire or something. Like, just give me something like
your helmet should be a freaking alien or hell demon skull grafted on the.
When I think of Doom, I think of like being a kid and like feeling like that stuff was too. It was forbidden. It was like weird and creepy. And what I've seen so far, it just feels like here's this clean Space Marine aesthetic, and then here's some hellish stuff sort of around it.
and I'm okay with. It's not like I'm asking for like a rich story to be wrapped around this.
Right.
I mean, you're Space Marines who can transform into a demon in hell. I mean, that's actually one of the big power-ups that gets passed around. So you can now transform into what seems like whatever demon you select. You can only select one in the beta, which is the Revenant, the sort of skeleton-looking guy with the rocket launchers on his shoulders. He has a jetpack. It's kind of fun to use. It's really just kind of like playing like a light version of Tribes or something. You're flying around. But yeah, that's like the only kind of thing that is weird or creepy or satanic that's built into this game. I mean, otherwise, I think the level design is really, really just kind of run-of-the-mill, kind of bulkheady corridors, and it functions well. It creates interesting matches, but you're not like, oh man, this is a really compelling, interesting environment. Like, I want to know more about the setting, or it provides a certain mood. Yeah, it doesn't do that at all for me. So a little underwhelmed. It's a little bit concerning. I mean, because the mechanics of some of the guns themselves, like the static gun, I think is really cool. When you read about it, you're like, okay, so it is a single shot rifle that you have to charge up by running around. You're generating the static electricity or whatever, and it goes into the gun, and it primes it up to a certain amount, and you're ready to fire like maximum energy, and you shoot it. And if you miss, then you have to like play defense in order to play offense. You have to dodge, run around, in order to like build up a decent shot. I think that's really, really interesting on paper, but the implementation of it is super disappointing. Like, you fire this gun, it's like firing this kind of like whiff of air or something, and there's no like interesting weird sound effect. There's no. It's called the static gun. I would want like some sort of like electricity or crackling. You'd expect just something weird, and the gun itself just looks like a plasma gun from, a generic game, and it just seems like a missed opportunity to put some personality into this interesting mechanic. Sniper rifle is kind of the same situation where it operates like TF2's sniper, where you right click, you wait for it to charge up to 100%, you fire, but the particle effect, the model just does nothing for me. So a little bit let down. Coming from id, I think the other thing I'd say is that this game definitely kind of shows some signs of being something that was developed and iterated on and kind of resetted halfway through the project, as Doom was. It's been worked on for better part of 6 years now, it seems like. So I think we're certainly like more interested in the single player. I think that's how I think of Doom, period. So hopefully they're able to do some interesting stuff there. Maybe it's a better context for those weapons, and we have a lot of NPCs coming at you and throwing their own kind of weird projectiles at you, and they're demonic enemies, I think, for the most part. So we'll wait and see, but right now I'm not convinced that the multiplayer is going to be a hugely compelling counter to stuff like Overwatch, which is also coming out next month.
Oof. I have an imaginary scenario for you. So the way Doom and Quake seem to have kind of grown more and more together over time in their design, which is maybe sort of both becoming more generic. Imagine what if id's next game was like Doom Quake or Quadoom or something.
Quadoom.
What would Quadoom be as a game? Like, how could you merge those two games into something just batshit? I don't know.
It wouldn't be hard. I mean, it's not like
would it actually be interesting, or are they just too similar now?
Well, this year's actually the 20th anniversary of Quake, 1996. Ooh. So maybe there's some opportunity there, but I think you would want the single player of Doom and the multiplayer of Quake. It's kind of a simple answer. You'd want the purity and sort of graceful feeling of movement in Quake, of bunny hopping and just high skill ceiling, like trusting the player to be really smart, be really athletic, be able to like think about power up and item timers in the background as they're moving in this like really athletic, acrobatic environment. And you want the creepiness and the mystery and like the unsettling sense of being overwhelmed and backpedaling of Doom single player, right? Where there's just all this stuff and it's all gushing blood and it has 10 eyeballs and there's a secret wall and like your rocket launcher is like half the screen and just that over the topness. It's something that it can be done. I mean, you look at the 2009 Wolfenstein game from Raven Software. I think a lot of people forgot about this game, partly because the most recent Wolfenstein games are pretty good. Yeah. But I think the 2009 Wolfenstein game, amazing single player weapon design. Amazing. Go Google Wolfenstein Particle Cannon. Is one of the most fun guns I've ever used. It is a fire hose that shoots like plasma basically and just melts people into ash as you hit them. And I mean, it helps that their enemy design was really, really great. But I think it can be done. I mean, the games are rich. Doom and Quake are both pretty rich sources for inspiration. I guess Quake is a little bit muddy and kind of generic, but Doom more so. Combining them though into a single hybrid game, that's an interesting thought exercise though, Wes.
I feel like Doom 3 and Quake, Quake 4 was that the last one, are kind of just like feel like the same game. I don't know. I never played either of them a lot. I guess Quake doesn't have as much of like the dark corridors haunted thing that Doom 3 had going on. But yeah, it feels like neither of those series has really gone anywhere after their like second to last game. Like the last game in each was just kind of a blah.
Well, I think one of the big reasons is they're insecure about storytelling. They're like, they both come from a time when not that the story didn't matter, but you could just get away from not explaining yourself, like you're a Marine on Mars and, you're just shooting all this weird shit basically. And
cool.
You're picking up key cards and like, who cares? It was the feeling and the technology was so compelling back then, what Doom did in 3D and a shooter and all those little details of how the shotgun worked and how like the music overlaid like was all very novel and exciting. And now it's like, well, now everything has to be kind of cinematic and there needs to be a context, there needs to be voice acting, there needs to be mocap. And I mean, how do you bolt that stuff in and not sort of make it take center stage over this heritage of it being like a very gameplay driven experience rather than a story driven experience? It's tough.
Maybe you don't actually need all that stuff.
Yeah.
Like Strafe is kind of trying to be Doom in 2016 without being 2016 Doom. They want to be 1994 Doom.
Yeah, I'd almost love to see. I'm really curious to see how Doom handles story. I mean, does it open with a narrated cutscene? Because that seems really awkward. You look at stuff like Double Daggers too, which almost feeds directly into what I'm talking about. It has this amazing creepy sense of mystery and weirdness and also feeds into like we were talking about a few weeks ago, like no one really knows how far the game goes. And it just doesn't explain itself. There's no narration, there's no text or explanation. You're just kind of thrown in, but it immediately has a mood, it has a sense of cohesiveness. I don't know, it's a hard thing to do. We're not saying it's easy, but right now Doom kind of letting me down, but we'll find out more in another month or so. So, Wes, let's circle back to that VR platform you've been spending so much time with.
There's so much to talk about with VR, I think. And at the same time, there's so much about VR that is really hard or impossible to describe experientially. Like you can talk about the specs of the hardware, but there's a good reason that Oculus stopped talking about the specs of their hardware at some point, and it wasn't because they were trying to hide that they were using shitty parts. It was because the parts don't matter nearly as much as how they're implemented and what the result of that is. Unlike you put in a good graphics card with X number of shader cores and X architecture, and that equals X frame rate, like that is known. VR, so much of it is about how your eyeballs interact with the lenses and the display behind the lenses that is just impossible to really describe until you just got to see it to some extent. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Are there any questions you guys want to ask me from what I've been playing? Should I just talk about some more of the games?
Boy.
Maybe talk some Oculus versus Vive stuff.
Yeah, I think it's worth revisiting in a sentence or two. What is the big difference? I think it's obviously the lack of motion controls right now on one of these platforms. But from your perspective right now, a couple weeks into really messing with this stuff and having it in our house, so to speak, how would you paint the picture Oculus versus Vive?
The Oculus feels like, and this is almost surprising coming from the upstart company. There's a weird reversal, right? Where 2 years ago, Oculus was the underdog. They did a Kickstarter to get money to build this thing. They were, the heroes of the homebrew open source crowd. The headset they put out is an immaculately polished product. Comes in this great packaging. Takes like 5 minutes to set up. Super easy to use. Super intuitive. It's designed with, there's a little light sensor inside the headset, so when you put the headset on, if the Oculus software is running, it will just automatically load up their UI for you, so you don't have to like click start on your screen and then put the headset on. Like it boots it up for you because it knows you're wearing it. The game presentation is very much like a polished first-party studio launch where they sponsored a bunch of game development, helped get those games on their platform. That is Oculus's launch to a T. It is like the polished, we are the big guys with the money event, and it went pretty smoothly. Other than they've been having some production or shipping issues, but like if you have the headset, it was smooth. Getting people the headsets there have been some problems with that. I think the Vive, on the other hand, and with Steam VR, is kind of coming in for not a crash landing because they really polished up their setup process towards the end there, but it is a much more involved setup. It's kind of like games are coming out every day. We were testing games up until the review launch yesterday and got an email from Valve that was like, oh, there are going to be twice as many games available tomorrow. There's just like a bunch more games came out, and some of them, a lot of those are demos. Some of them are games that were already on Steam that got VR support thrown in, but that one is definitely kind of like it's happening as we're looking at it. It's like in progress very much, which is cool and exciting, but also it's a little more confusing. It's kind of hard to totally wrap your head around, which isn't necessarily a problem for just the average person buying a VR headset. It just makes it harder kind of to evaluate as one experience. But that's part of Steam VR's thing, right? Is Steam VR is not attached to the Vive. They're kind of partnering together, but the two can be used independently. And Valve is developing software that other people will be able to use. You'll be able to use Steam VR on an Oculus headset if you want. The only thing is some of the games maybe won't work on the Oculus. The full room scale stuff doesn't have a correlation right now because the hardware is different,
right?
That kind of thing. But it's designed to be a more open platform. So the big differences between the two are Oculus's headset is really, really well designed ergonomically. The Vive, not as much, but I think has a better view experience if you get it exactly right. And man, those touch controllers make a big difference.
So cool.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. So cool.
I also want to bring up, we wrote about it yesterday on the site, but Valve, in sort of rolling out all of its promotional materials for the Vive and Steam VR this week, put out this little video clip, and you had all these montages of different experiences in VR, and they had a really interesting way of filming those actually, where they like sort of inserted people via green screen into the VR screen or whatever. But anyway. Dota 2 seems like it's getting a VR spectating mode.
It's so cool.
If this video clip is to be believed, so I'll just kind of narrate what we're looking at on the stream right here. So again, this is sort of a quick clip from a montage that Valve released, and it shows somebody watching a high-level Dota 2 match and sort of teasing that, Valve is saying that you're going to look forward to seeing more VR sort of functionality and features in your favorite games. And you see someone in first person in this sort of virtual arena. We've seen these kind of virtual screens before, obviously. There's virtual desktop and stuff in VR. But they're watching this match on a huge screen, but they're kind of flanked by different Dota 2 characters that correspond with who's in the match. And at one point, the spectator clicks on one of them and it animates, it does something. I'm not really sure what that does. It's a bit unclear.
I think maybe he's changing which character you can spectate, or maybe it's just seeing that player's stats and stuff.
Right. And then of course there's sort of like a 3D map at their feet or their hip level, and there's sort of some translucent stat panels that they bring up as well. So it's a bit unclear, is that just sort of a proof of concept? What's that going to look like in the wild? Is it actually coming, or are they just testing something? Are they teasing something? Is Counter-Strike going to get an equivalent mode? Because that's a really popular FPS. But
did you suddenly thinking about buying a Vive?
Actually, no. I mean, I'm not sure if I am. I would certainly be interested to try it. But for me, and I think a lot of other people, watching esports is much more passive experience, very intentionally, where I want to be able to reach for a bag of popcorn. I want to be able to read Twitter and people commenting as it's happening. I want to play a game while I'm watching stuff on the side and just not paying much attention to it. And that's the experience I want, I think, that type of feature will definitely lure some Dota has some hardcore players, I've heard, a couple of those. It'll lure some people in because they really want to just engage directly and focus a ton on that and have what Valve was probably going to frame as the ultimate experience for something like the International. I'm guessing if Valve's 10-year history with TF2 and these other games is any indication, they're going to offer some really big incentives for you to jump into this that are exclusive digital items and stuff like that and other stuff. But I don't know. Do you guys have a reaction watching that clip to watching an esports event in VR?
So think about when you've probably watched some Counter-Strike tournaments where you're this is the big tournament for the year. I'm going to watch this for 10 hours straight. Or I'm going to spend a whole Saturday watching this event.
Did that last weekend, by the way.
Yeah. At the end of that, do you feel either mentally, eyeball-wise, or whatever, or even physically tired because you've been doing this one activity for so long? That can be exhausting. You go to a movie marathon, all you're doing is sitting there, but you're still tired out after doing that because you're focusing on this one thing for such a length of time. Imagine doing that with something that weighs a pound strapped to your head. It is. Yeah. I think what you said was basically the summary of at the end of my Oculus review. It came down to analyzing the experiences that were there so far and what it felt like to be in these different virtual worlds, virtual experiences. And I think the way I put it is the question you're going to ask yourself after you get over the initial novelty of experiencing this, which is an amazing novelty, absolutely. The first many hours you try out VR, it's going to blow your mind. But after you get over that initial shine, the question you're going to ask yourself is it worth putting on this thing that's not uncomfortable, but is not nearly as comfortable as nothing being on your face, and be totally focused on this one thing, not being able to check Twitter, not be able to text message somebody, not be able to play a game on the side or watch an episode of TV while you're playing a game or whatever. And it is going to have to be a really compelling experience to make you say, yes, it is worth doing that. And I think a lot of stuff like spectating esports events, there's going to be a really cool novelty factor where you want to check that out. Dota matches can last an hour and a half when they run long. Do you want to watch an entire hour and a half match with this thing kind of pulling down on your face? Maybe you lay down and look up at the ceiling, and then gravity is a little more on your side. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I think that's a thing that a lot of people are going to start experiencing after a few months, having their headsets where they're going to go, it's kind of a pain to put this on. If I want to play this one particular game that's really cool, I'm going to do it. Otherwise, I'll just watch it on my monitor.
Yeah. I think esports tournament schedules just by necessity. I mean, this isn't any criticism of tournaments. I think it's how they have to be run, but they monopolize your whole day. I mean, if you're dedicated to watching a major tournament like CSGO's major in Columbus last weekend, there's breaks. They have to set up stuff. They have to move people around. They need to, get cameras ready and stuff like that, and do interviews and do promo segments and commercials. Like, it's a whole day thing, and that's part of why I want it to be passive, because otherwise it just monopolizes your whole day. You have to be able to jump away when they go to break and stuff like that. So,
but I mean, the flip side of that is if they do these spectator modes really well and really in depth, like the ability, I think it'd probably be more compelling for Counter-Strike, but like to jump into a first-person view from the map and be like, if they're playing on Dust and you want to watch what's the main hallway long, is that what people call it?
Long.
Is that right? So
mid.
What if you could just go first person and just sit there and have an entire wrapped field of view from VR, and just like looking around to wait for somebody to peek through those doors and get sniped or something like that? Or having an on the map view of mid in Dota when a team fight starts and seeing all the characters like life size running past you. I don't know if the fidelity of the models holds up for that, but potentially that could be a really cool way to just feel like, oh, I am as in the action of this game as I could be, even more so than when you're actually playing it.
I think it's a good point. I almost wonder if sandbox competitive multiplayer games, Arc is getting a huge emphasis on this. The battle royale style games, survival games that we're seeing now, H1Z1, I almost wonder if that's a better candidate for VR spectating, because they're in these big sandbox environments that are often like pretty lush and interesting, and you want to be able to poke around them and sort of see a big overall view of like who's getting close to whom within a map, and like how close two players are to encountering each other and getting in a fight, but also dial into the more intimate like house, and this guy's like crawling through shrubbery or something with a spear to try and get up against somebody. I don't know. That might be an interesting kind of like literal like battle royale, the movie kind of experience.
And as the technology gets better, when the second generation of these headsets come out with higher resolution monitors, it's going to make a lot of this stuff just work better. Like right now, the idea of having a giant view screen in VR it's pretty cool. It's better than, it is the equivalent of having like an IMAX screen really close to your face. And it does really feel like you're looking at this giant screen, and that's different than looking at a monitor, but it's still not that high pixel density for that screen. Is nowhere near as good a pixel density as looking at a 1080p screen from a couple feet away, because it's an inch away from your eyes, right? So when those screens hit 4K resolution or something, and we actually have the GPU power to render games at 90 hertz or above, that's going to make it even more compelling to have this screen that close to your face and be able to get inside something or just emulate a TV in VR. But for now, I think the stuff that's more interesting is when you can get into a world, like when I was talking about Call of Starseed, it's immersive enough that's where you forget about the specs. That's where you forget, like, oh, this screen isn't super pixel dense, because it's good enough to let you read text written on a notepad, and it's good enough for you to discern objects in the environment and feel like you're in this place. And that's when you forget about the fact that you're wearing this kind of heavy headset and that you're trying to be careful not to trip over a cord and stuff. Like, I think part of the reason I don't want to wear the Oculus for a really long period of time is because not a lot of stuff is totally taking my mind off the fact that I'm immersed in this VR experience, and when you're in the Vive, if you're doing something boring, you're like, man, I'm kind of want to sit down, or man, this thing's really heavy on my face, or these straps aren't that comfortable. But then when you're in the zone, you forget about that stuff, and that definitely helps.
Great. So I'll look forward to your official review of the Vive coming soon on PCgamer.com, Wes. Thanks. And yeah, exciting stuff.
I imagine there's probably some people in chat who have VR questions we can get to soon.
Yeah, throw your questions at us, guys, and comments. I think we're happy to read those out as well. But if you are joining us on Twitch as opposed to listening through iTunes or your podcast delivery mechanism of choice, We'll look forward to answering those live. In the meantime, I wonder if you guys have any thoughts or comments on this EVE Online war, this latest battle that's broken out. We've got some cool in-depth coverage of it on the site from our EVE correspondent. But I think it definitely falls in that category of, we don't have any EVE players on staff. I guess Tyler is our closest thing. He played a little bit of it a few years ago when there were other wars breaking out. But it's just great to know that this stuff is going on in the background. The stories that it generates, obviously, and if you've been following along, there was also a book released this week by former PC Gamer contributor Andrew Groen. I think it's called Empires of Eve.
Sounds right.
It's on Amazon right now, but it's basically he spent a couple years writing. It's a chronicle of some of the best war stories and characters within this universe that are actual people, of course.
All of them are, unless there's some sentient AI stuff going on in EVE that would not surprise me too much.
Yeah, we've got an excerpt of that book up on our website as well. It's just a really fascinating story that he told of, essentially, I'll just summarize it real quick. Like, there's a star system where there are 2 shipyards, and like one of the biggest alliances in the game, they've had this big coalition rise up against them, right? And they get ready to raid this star system that they know they're constructing like this extremely expensive ship called a Titan. But there are two of these like dry docks basically, right? And one of them is constructing it, and the other one is constructing nothing. So go read it on the site. It's really fascinating. But basically, like the really clever tactician, this like well-known general within the game, places all of his defenses on the one that is not building the Titan ship. And he makes this huge gamble. He leaves the Titan undefended on the notion that all these like thousands of attackers, I think it's actually just 1,000 attackers, well, they're going to go after his defenses. They're going to attack his defense. They're not going to, because they have no way of really peering in and seeing for sure. And that's eventually how it plays out. But it's just super fascinating, like it's the kind of high-level strategy you expect in like 17th century war or something, where there's all this like intimate subterfuge, and because the world is kind of small and like there isn't like air power and stuff like that yet, it allows for like lots of human influence on war. You know what I mean? Anyway, it's really exciting stuff. Let's turn to our Twitch audience.
Someone should teach that Go robot to play EVE Online.
That would be great. All right, JBJ Blaze, our subscriber, how's it going? JBJ asks, having heard about troubles that others have had with Windows 10 games, such as Total Biscuit, what do you guys think of Windows 10 games and the UWP setup? Oh, this is a big question. Microsoft recently kind of clarified its plans with UWP at an event that you attended.
I talked to Phil Spencer about it a little bit. He kind of did like it wasn't a one-on-one interview, but it was just a bunch of journalists asking him questions, and he answered them to the degree of being forthcoming as he was willing to be, I guess, or allowed to be. None of it was really good news at all. Yes, we're aware of the issues games like Gears of War launched with. We've written about that some. We're testing Quantum Break right now. None of us are playing it personally, but I know we have a couple people playing it.
Yeah, Andy Kelly on our UK team.
Aware that there's some weird resolution stuff going on there. I can't speak to it specifically other than that port is not in great shape either. The UWP system in general, I'm trying to remember specifically what Phil Spencer told me, but the question I asked him that I was really hoping to get a happier answer on was, how are they looking to support modding in the future? Because the point of UWPs is it's a different way of, or Universal Windows apps, it's a different way of packaging a game so that you can't kind of mess with the code path of the software to insert malware, for example. Cool, I don't want malware in my games, but by definition, that approach limits the ability to mod software in really any way that is not publisher or developer designated. So a game that has built-in modding tools, yeah, there will still be mod support for that, which is good. But most games that really need to be modded do not have mod support and that's why they need to be modded, because usually they're bad ports that have tons of bugs or don't run at higher resolutions or higher frame rates or whatever. And that's the kind of stuff that mod communities go in and fix. And his answer to the question of will they be able to support stuff like that was basically no. Or was they're not planning on it. Because I asked him, I used Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines as an example. If that game launched today as a UW on the UWP platform and was as broken as it was when it came out, no one would play it. But the reason you can play that game today, and it's amazing, is because people spent 10 years patching out the bajillion bugs that it had and fixing it up. And they said, his answer was, well, if you're trying to inject code into the game, we won't be able to tell if it's malware or if it's well-intentioned. And it seems like their choice there is kind of to blanket limit that stuff. It's still a platform that is kind of nascent. It's still developing. Clearly, the launch has not gone well for them from a technical perspective. They said they were happy with how games have performed sales-wise, but they would say that. I'm guessing that those numbers haven't been as high as they would like. Yeah. And I think people are getting a bad taste in their mouth from games coming out with these really limited settings, and I don't think that's going to be a compelling case to buy a game on the Windows 10 store or buy a game packaged in this way if you've seen 5 examples of ones where performance was messed up and didn't run as well as the Steam version, couldn't mod it the way you could the Steam version, yada yada. So I think we're pretty unhappy with them, and I'm not too worried about them for the future of games, because I think if they keep sucking the way they suck right now, it's just no one's gonna go down that road except for his party stuff. So
I think that was an editorial that you wrote, right?
Yes. It said if they're that bad, they're already doomed, and they seem like it's only gotten worse since then. So I don't know. I'm not super worried about it, but I would love to see them find a way to work with developers to come up with a more secure platform for distributing games that they felt was safe, that didn't have those kind of limitations. Maybe that's not possible, but I think there's it's kind of a lot of like fear-mongering misdirection to say that it's all about security, because I don't know, how many times in your life have you installed a game that wasn't pirated, I guess, that had a virus in it or had something that damaged your computer in any significant way?
Maybe once, 15 years ago, maybe.
There's the very occasional bug where like, oops, this game will erase your hard drive. But that's not the kind of thing this would fix anyway. So I think the notion of it being safer is all well and good, but the reality is that like that's not really a problem for anyone right now. So I don't know why we're trying to solve that. Maybe that's just an excuse.
Good summary. Well, I guess we'll continue to follow that. Hopefully it doesn't get in the way of some of our favorite experiences. As some of you mentioned in the chat, yes, we do have a port report from our pal Andy Kelly over in the UK talking about Quantum Break and his experience in there so far, and we'll have a review on that pretty soon. It's a little bit concerning that we got review code so late for that game.
It's like the day of launch or after launch even?
I think it was the day of or the day before launch, so that's never quite a good sign, but we can, we reserve judgment, obviously.
Yep.
But yeah, check that out if you're interested in learning more about jumping into that game. Boatnik asks, any chance PCG will be demoing or streaming some of the VR games? Was fun watching various launch streams and video reviews. Giant Bomb Untested video format seems particularly useful for VR. Yeah, I mean, we're definitely happy to, as always, like do what is most useful to our audience. And if it's walking around and looking dumb in VR, we're happy to do it for the cause. That's very hard to do. I've yet to see a single person look super cool, but yeah, I think there are some technical challenges, but just keep in touch with us over Twitter. That's really a great way to reach us individually or on the PC Gamer handle and let us know what you want. We're always watching that stuff and we really absorb that information. Yep. So,
yeah, unfortunately, our video resources are stretched pretty thin, which is why we probably haven't done tons of video VR stuff already. But I think with the Steam VR. There's a way to get a good output, like Evan was talking about, kind of seeing like an outline of a person in VR, which you might have seen with some of the video that's out there. I think that is something we could set up and do, which is a much better analog to the experience of being in VR than just like gameplay footage, because it just doesn't capture the same thing. You can watch gameplay footage of Lucky's Tale and say, oh, that looks like a cute platformer, but it's not the same thing.
Okay. Well, we answered this question last week, but I'll ask it again to our different audience. Do you believe No Man's Sky is going to live up to the massive universe exploration game, or that it will actually get lost in that and become dull? This is a question from The Last Casual. So our editor, Chris Livingston, who actually got to play 30 minutes of
the whole game.
No Man's Sky, that's all that they allowed press to play.
What do you do, really? That question pisses me off.
Yeah. Like, I think I'll kind of revisit my answer and maybe expand on it from last week. I think, if anything, press and ourselves are kind of, the audience sort of, and the internet in general are sort of to blame for the reputation this game has gained of like, oh man, infinite possibilities, and oh man, infinite universes, and they're all kind of different, and they all have different aliens and animals, and I can go wherever I want, and everything's unique. And can anybody make that game? I don't think so. I don't think it's a possibility right now. I mean, without it being a 10-year project or something and hundreds of millions of dollars, like, this is a small independent developer that got a ton of interest, got a lot of investment, got some support from Sony. I think that's great. It's going to make it a better experience. But no, I don't think you should walk into No Man's Sky expecting, a bespoke, super sandbox, super like diverse experience. I mean, what's been shown so far, what gives people that indication? I do think it's going to be a little bit of like some palette swapping, and I think there'll be some good ideas in there, but you can't let your expectations get ahead of you. I mean, it's just like seeing a movie or something. If you go in thinking that the new Avengers movie is going to be the best thing ever, Batman Superman's kind of pretty underwhelming. I haven't seen it. I'm probably not going to, but like, it's on you a little bit to kind of keep yourself in check. And I know that's tough when you follow games and you're passionate about them and you want things to be the best they can and you want to be hopeful. But
if you've ever played anything procedurally generated, you should have some idea of what to expect. I mean, procedural generation can do amazing things, and I think No Man's Sky looks like it's going to have a great implementation of those ideas and be able to mix body parts for animals and, obviously the colors of the environments and that kind of stuff. But you're going to eventually see the machinations, at work behind the graphics and how those things are put together. So it's kind of on you whether what you get out of it. I mean, it has systems in terms, things to reward you for exploration and crafting and combat and that kind of stuff. So it's not like it's just, oh, here's a red planet, here's a blue planet. Is this experience meaningful to me on some like soulful level because I like experiencing new planets? There's going to be stuff to do, but it's not a game you're going to play for a year.
I mean, in truth, I don't want to sound too cynical, but I mean, when you think about it, what are the big technical advances in games, in games programming over the past decade? AI, definitely not one of them. I think it's like objects in the environment you can look at. We just talked about the advancement from DS2 to DS3, and what's allowing you to, fight many more enemies, maybe feel a little more overwhelmed. The way that changes the combat system. Ashes of Singularity is a good example. That's running on a unique technology, and I think DirectX 12 or something.
It's DirectX 12, and just like tons of shit on screen, shooting lasers and missiles and stuff.
It's sort of like a Supreme Commander type experience with massive scale, and that's really exciting. But it's like a factor of 10 or 100, and they're doing some cool stuff behind the background to make that possible. But it's not like games over the past 10 or 15 years have suddenly evolved to have like learning AI that pays attention to the way you play. And that was such a like overpromised thing in the back of boxes in the 2000s, I think. And people, what do people point to when they think about what game has good AI? Fear is the game that always comes up for whatever reason. I think it's more to do with animations and barks and stuff like that. But yeah. All right. Any other questions here? Looking around. That might be it for us this week, guys. Some comparisons to Spore and No Man's Sky. I've definitely heard that one before. Wes, I don't know if you had a chance to peer at the NVIDIA announcement from yesterday at all.
We have a write-up on it.
Yeah.
What I assume you're referring to, that Jared wrote. Jared from Maximum PC. Our hardware teams have combined in some sort of Captain Planet sense to produce better hardware coverage. And Jared would be the person to talk to it instead of me, because he understands GPU architecture at a level I do not. So I'm guessing his write-up is pretty good on that stuff. But I know they talked a little about their next architecture and also some like deep learning PC AI stuff. Yeah. It sounds like they're just throwing a lot of computational cores at the problem, and that's how you do AI well.
Yeah.
But I don't know beyond that.
Yeah, but we'll look forward to having our Maximum PC comrades on this show in the future to answer more of your hardware questions. But until then, I've been Evan. This is James. Wes, thanks for joining us this week, guys, to talk about Dark Souls, Doom, and more. You can find us on Twitch every Wednesday at 1 o'clock Pacific time, twitch.tv/PCGamer. The show is also posted on youtube.com/PCGamer and on our iTunes page where you can subscribe. And yeah, thanks again for listening, watching. We'll see you again this time next week.
Bye.
Bye.